Anytime someone says healthcare should be a right, some clown will pop up and say, actually, anything that requires the labor of others can't be a right. Let's for now ignore the ridiculous version of this argument, which implies that free at the point of delivery healthcare requires forcing doctors to treat people at gunpoint. We also need to ignore the fact that capital income and rental income both require the labor of others, and therefore can't be rights, so taxing them to pay for universal healthcare should be perfectly acceptable. And we need to ignore the fact that our labor would be much less productive without the advancements in technology made possible by generations of other people's labor. I suppose then we also need to ignore the fact that our labor relies on the labor of the parents who raised us, and the teachers that educated us, and the people who built the roads we drive to work on, and so on and so on. Finally, we need to ignore that the relative wealth of people living in rich countries is made possible by the labor of those living in less rich countries. In short, we need to ignore the obvious fact that our world is so interconnected that literally everything we do relies on the labor of others, and instead read the clown's argument as something like, healthcare can't be a right because the policies necessary to provide people with that right require taxation, which forces people to give up some of the income they have worked for. A few years ago, we might have dealt with this argument by pointing out that lots of things we commonly talk about as rights are funded through taxation. The right to vote requires a lot of administration. We could save a significant amount of taxpayer money by abolishing elections and adopting a monarchy. Similarly, the right to a fair trial can't be a real right, as it forces the taxpayer to stump up for judges and juries when we could skip all that and settle for just the executioner. Recently, however, it seems like the clowns are being more open about the fact that they don't really care for these rights either, so this line is now less effective. We need instead to talk about a right the clowns would never want to abandon, the right to property. There's two major problems with maintaining that people have a right to property while claiming that healthcare can't be a right because it requires taxation. Firstly, while it's true that abstractly saying people have the right to private property doesn't cost anything, neither does abstractly saying that people have the right to healthcare. Abstractly saying things is one of the last free forms of entertainment available. However, making the abstract things we say concrete does cost money, and we spend a whole bunch of tax money enforcing people's property rights and maintaining the institutions that make property possible. The second problem is that property law actually functions a lot like tax law. If I think a piece of land is mine, but property law disagrees, it will be forcefully taken from me. If I think some money is mine, but tax law disagrees, it will be forcefully taken from me. Tax law might take 30% of the apples I pick from a tree, but if property law says that tree belongs to someone else, it'll take 100% of my apples. Societies have a set of norms about how they distribute resources, and some of these norms are enshrined in law, and those who violate them are punished. In this regard, there's no difference between a law which forces us to respect society's norms around property and a law which forces us to respect society's norms around providing people with healthcare. We can argue about whether these laws are fair or conducive to a well-functioning economy, but we can't make those arguments based on violence or voluntarism, as all laws are enforced with violence, and none of them are voluntary. The clown might seek to get around this by claiming that their property is an extension of their person, that attacking their land is equivalent to attacking them, and the property law is therefore just an outsourced form of self-defense. But there's no equivalency there. Your property is not you. It's merely something society has decided you have a right to. If enforcing that right is outsourced self-defense, then so is enforcing the right to healthcare. You are not soil, even if your skull is full of it. But we still haven't got to the core issue with the clown's argument. When someone says people should have a right to healthcare, what they're really saying is that society should make an effort to guarantee that people who need healthcare get it. The important question here is, should healthcare be treated like schools, roads, and the fire department? Or should it be treated like breakfast cereal? Focusing on what a right is, rather than how healthcare should be funded, is an attempt by opponents of public healthcare to hide their heartfelt belief that poor people should die behind an abstract philosophical discussion. But it fails, even on its own terms, because outside of the legal context, saying something should be a right is just a way of making a strong moral claim, and all moral claims require things of people. That's why we argue about them. Trying to circumvent that argument by claiming that the sacrifices required by the rights you favour are fine, but the sacrifices required by the rights you oppose are unacceptable, isn't going to convince anyone who doesn't already agree with you. People have the rights we collectively decide they have. There's no shortcut around the negotiation required by this fact, because we live in a society. I thought clowns knew this.